At Lithgow in the Blue Mountains, the first tragedy, when a state emergency services volunteer trying to rescue two other men in a truck was washed into a stream. Then, yesterday afternoon at Artarmon on Sydney's lower North Shore, a teenage girl slipped into a stormwater drain. A man dived in to save her, and both were dragged under by it. There were dozens of near fatalities. At Plumpton in the western suburbs, the dramatic rescue of 3 teenagers and a woman who'd clung to a tree for 2 hours after being washed from a bridge. But at nearby Mount Druitt, disaster, as a young Sydney couple clutching their 2 young children attempted to swim clear of their flooded car. The current was so strong that the children, one a 3-year-old toddler, the other a 9-month-old baby, were dragged from their parents' arms. As the deluge continued, 2 milkmen were electrocuted when power lines fell on them at Yagoona in the southern suburbs. The sea was so wild that this 40,000-tonne ship broke free and drifted dangerously out of control. This morning, it's anchored safely. With dozens of cars abandoned where they stopped, traffic lights out of order, and many major roads badly damaged, motorists still face lengthy delays. Ferries, Sydney Airport and most train services are operating normally, and the Weather Bureau predicts the showers will ease later today. Russia reporting for 11 a.m.
Recovered the bodies of the 2 children from their parents in a Mount Druitt Creek crossing. We'll have a full report on the devastation of the Sydney flood.
Continued to rise along with the death toll. This storm had many heroes, but the hero in the first tragedy at Artarmon is believed to have drowned while trying to rescue a girl. This morning, the search of bodies. Another heroic act at Lithgow. Here again, the rescuer is feared dead. Later in the evening, as the record downfall continued to pound the city and suburbs, more drama, more trauma, and more tragedy. At Mount Druitt, a car is swept off the road. The family of 4 tries to escape their swamped car, but are washed downstream. In one of the most dramatic rescues of the night, police commandeered a large truck, powered it into the flooded area and used it as a breakwater. A small boat was launched to reach the 2 adults, found shocked, clinging for their lives to trees. The 9-month-old baby and a 3-year-old girl weren't to be found in the turbulence. Early this morning, the body of that girl was found entangled in debris. The next incident was a near tragedy. This is just amazing courage, incredible luck, and another one of those heroes. An elderly woman this time, she dived into a swollen river to save 3 teenage boys who were swept off a bridge. But the elements were too strong. Together, the 4 were pitched into trees.
You'll be right, sir.
It was the army to the rescue at this caravan park in Lansvale. Their method was certainly unusual, but nobody cared because lives were saved. Huge front-end loaders were used to scoop the occupants from the rising water. They were scared, freezing cold, and they were confused.
How'd you go? Whereabouts did it get you? Whereabouts did it pull you out?
Hey?
Whereabouts did it pull you out?
We were staying in the shower room.
You're up in the caravan park, were you?
Yeah, I got separated from my woman. I don't know where she is.
The damage of the Sydney killer storms became obvious with sunrise this morning. Small creeks were still suburban lakes with rooftops islands. Cars and houses are awash with water up to 2 metres deep. One stranded car seemed to be signalling its own plea for help. A factory in Lansvale had its roof completely blown off to take its toll. Boats ferried the homeless, as many of those who remained stranded on high ground. For many animals, the rising waters had taken them by surprise. This morning, it was time to resume searching for bodies of those missing. It was time to count the costs, and it was time to hope this kind of storm doesn't happen for another 100 years. Larry Emder reporting for 11 a.m.
A night of tragedy and disaster, but also, as Larry Emder reported, a night of heroes.
Where she disappeared. A man missing while trying to rescue the woman is still the subject of a wide search in the area. Earlier, rescuers made the tragic recovery of 2 youngsters who were swept into a swollen creek at Mount Druitt. The children, aged 18 months and 4 years, were with their parents who were trying to cross a bridge when their car stalled. Another victim who was swept into a swollen river at Lithgow is still the subject of a large search in the west. And 2 milkmen were electrocuted when power lines fell over their truck at Yagoona last night. But there's not only the cost in lives, but the cost financially. Insurance companies estimate multi-million-dollar payouts. Thousands of Sydney homes have been damaged and thousands of residents are without shelter. Lansvale in the southwest has been underwater throughout the night and flood levels are rising. The city and suburbs are littered with broken vehicles. On many roads, they've added to the traffic chaos. The State Emergency Services has received over 1,500 calls for help. People stranded in houses, caravans, trees. A large percentage of the workforce has been unable to get to work. Rail services have been cut by floodwaters. The Eastern Suburbs line, a main casualty. The State Rail Authority has had to call in buses to ferry people around cut rail lines. However, there are only limited buses as drivers are unable to get to work. Police say Sydney's roads are in the worst condition in more than 20 years. Accidents, breakdowns, flooding and road subsidence litters all the arterial roads. Many rivers and creeks around Sydney have yet to reach their peak levels, and this afternoon further flooding is expected. Brady Halls.
And sucked under the swirling waters. The distraught parents were taken to hospital, and this morning divers recovered the children's bodies. Another desperate rescue at Plumpton for 5 people left clinging to a tree for 2 hours. All were hauled to safety, shocked but glad to be alive. SES crews at Narrabeen worked all night to hold back the floodwaters, while at sea off Wollongong, another emergency. The cargo ship Golden Falcon drifting perilously close to rocks. Her engines unable to cope with the huge swell. Tugs eventually managed to manoeuvre the vessel into safer waters. Daylight saw searches resume for those still missing. The body of 20-year-old Joy Burrows was recovered downstream from where she'd fallen into a stormwater drain at Artarmon. Then another double tragedy. A milkman was electrocuted after becoming entangled in live power lines. His brother-in-law went to his aid. He also died after stepping into an electrified sheet of water.
It's very hard to believe, but I don't think it's sunk in yet.
As the deluge began to ease, the runoff from the Blue Mountains caused the Hawkesbury River to break its banks, as did the Georges River, flooding vast areas west and south of Sydney. It became a suburban lake with rooftop islands. Hundreds of hectares of market gardens went under. The town of Windsor lay isolated. For farmers, there was only one way to muster stock to higher ground. More than 1,000 homes were evacuated, and even more cars were left where they stalled. A flotilla of boats formed the only lifeline.
Hold on to it. Hold on. Hold on to the boat.
With state emergency workers stretched to their limit, the state government has begun to assess the full extent of the flooding. Premier Barry Unsworth took to the skies today with Emergency Services Minister George Paciullo flying by helicopter over the flooded residential areas. And the Premier's assessment
would appear to me that this flood is one of the biggest floods we've had in my recollection, and the damages will no doubt run into millions.
The NRMA has estimated a possible insurance payout of $100. State Cabinet meets tomorrow morning to work out a precise assistance plan for those flooded out. A state of emergency has been declared in 4 municipalities. Greg Granger, 7 National News.
There are houses in Sydney tonight where the storm will be remembered forever. They're the homes which have lost loved ones. Every death, of course, is a tragedy, but one family seems to have suffered more than most. A mother and her husband survived their accident, but their daughters were pulled from their arms and drowned by the floodwaters.
The police warning was blunt. stay at home, don't put yourself and your family at risk. For some, that advice was too late. At Mount Druitt's Durham Street, a family car stalled. The night became a nightmare. With floodwater swirling all around them, the husband and wife took their 2 children and tried to wade to safety. Death came quickly. The toddler and the baby were torn from their arms. They could do nothing as the children were swept into the darkness. Above the storm, both parents cried for help. By a miracle, someone heard them.
My workmate and I were coming along here and we were stopped by motorists. They told us there was cries of help coming from the creek. We undressed and we went in as far as we could. But
a semi-trailer was used by police and SES rescuers to launch a boat. Finally, it reached the stranded couple, still clinging helplessly to the branches of a tree. They were hauled to safety and the comfort of police.
They were just crying out, help, help, and the kids.
It was a slow trip to hospital, even in an ambulance. The search for the 2 children continued all night. It didn't stop as a grey dawn broke. Finally, the body of 3-year-old Cindy Carrick was found. Baby sister Raylene Newman, who would have had her first birthday next month, is still missing. Tonight, both parents are still under medical supervision, totally shocked by the horror of last night. For Pam Carrick and Mark Newman, grief is just beginning. The memory of Durham Street Bridge will never go away. Gina Pickering, 7 National News.
In another storm tragedy, 2 milkmen died at Yagoona in Sydney southwest. Alan Cooper and Greg Black, both 27, were killed last night by fallen power lines.
Brothers-in-law Alan Cooper and Greg Black went out on their regular milk run despite atrocious conditions.
It's very hard to have a business and say, oh, it's raining, I'm going to stay home.
Jeanette Cooper lost not only her husband, his partner was her brother, Greg.
It's very hard to sort of know how you feel. I mean, when we saw them last night, I said they were just so peaceful, I was happy for them, and I just thought it was just like they were sleeping.
Their milk truck was back outside the Cooper home today. The 2 men died around 9:30 last night. In the downpour, Alan Cooper didn't see fallen power lines. He was killed instantly. Searching for his mate in the dark, Greg Black was electrocuted too. When the ambulance arrived here at the scene, Greg Black was shouting, "Don't come near me, I'm live." Rolled him off the wires with pieces of wood, but he died on the way to hospital.
They went to school together and have worked together, played football together. Alan married to my daughter Jeanette, and very, very good mates a long way through.
You go through times when you just sort of, you're feeling nothing. You think, oh, you come back and you're just going to walk through that door. And it's just all a bad dream.
In Artarmon, on the other side of Sydney, another family was hit by tragedy. 20-year-old Joy Burrows drowned after being swept several kilometres in a stormwater torrent.
I believe it was Joy's time, and the Lord took her to himself through using something that she loved, water. She loved water.
Joy, a strong swimming EPE teacher, was returning to her Narromburn home from college last night. She was with a girlfriend and they decided to wade down the stormwater drain near Artarmon Reserve. A flash flood brought the water level up to their shoulders.
She would know nothing about it because she was smiling one minute and laughing, waving to her friend. And as they paddled, or doggy paddled, or tried to swim in this, next minute she'd gone. She acted sometimes before she thought, and that's the problem.
A wall of water surged into the streets from Prospect Creek, creating some of the most difficult moments encountered by rescue teams and heartbreak for local residents.
You all right? He's all right?
Volunteers have been scouring Landsvale streets for the last 24 hours, looking for residents marooned in their own houses, caught by the overflow from choked drains and local creeks. From the air, you get the full impact. The sheer magnitude of the flooding almost beyond belief. Those lucky enough to get their cars out in time were left isolated on asphalt islands, surrounded by water up to 3 metres deep. The muddy tide claimed the rest, sweeping over vehicles and property. Clearways are now waterways. While some evacuees paddled their way through the debris, others had to wait for the rescue boats.
Hold on to it. Hold on. Hold on to the boat. Right.
Overtaxed and overtired, the frustrations weren't far from the surface.
Jesus Christ!
In the move to higher ground, some families were split up. Looking back at the devastation only added to their distress. Insurance companies are braced for an avalanche of claims. It will be several days before assessors can even begin to see the extent of damage to suburbs like Landsvale. Wordsworth, 7 National News.
And still ahead in this special edition of some dramatic pictures of some daring rescues on our flood-swollen waterways.
Other than driving along flooded Mount Druitt roads. Eager to reach her waiting children on the far side of a flooded creek, she was joined by 2 others, Son Lun and Siti, for the crossing. The swirling waters washed them off their feet downstream before they could grab a post.
Were they in any great danger? Yes, I think they could have been, just through the fact of the rushing water, mainly. It's very treacherous.
Seeing their plight, Ronald Vane jumped in to help them, but he too became stranded as the waters strengthened. Seeing the drama unfold, Mrs. Burns's children called the police, who joined with Stace in a desperate effort to get the 4 to shore. The first to report back was one of the exhausted SES men.
2 of us went in to get them out and take the low loader in and pulled them out by rope then.
Finally, Mrs. Burns was brought to shore by boat. The other 3, 2 men and a woman, were taken to the far bank of the swollen waterway and from there to hospital, suffering exposure and cold. The nightmare over, Mrs. Burns had nothing but joy and thanks for her rescuers.
All right, Beverly, they're just covering up for the water. Right, sweetness, keep the water off you, okay?
Bye-bye.
Okay.
She also was placed in an ambulance to be taken to Blacktown Hospital, but not before one of her rescuers succumbed to the cold. His near-freezing boots were removed and replaced with thermal sheeting before the 2, rescuer and rescued, jointly went to hospital. It was one of the most hair-raising rescues in a night of desperate efforts.
Around Landsvale in the west, the army was called in to literally shovel through flooded debris and rescue those held captive by rising floodwaters. But this evacuee wasn't thinking of his own life.
I got 7 brothers from my woman, I don't know where she is.
Yeah? What, he lost in the water?
No, she come back in the boat, I just had to stay behind.
Yeah, right. Yeah?
But he's
Under the caravan park.
Stuffed.
This morning, swelling Georges River seemed to chase people to higher ground. More evacuees, more homeless. In Cabramatta, a local Salvation Army hall looked more like a bomb shelter in war-torn Beirut.
And apparently the people in the caravans, they were only given about 5 or 10 minutes notice, some of them came without shoes, without anything.
This seriously ill man still manages a smile as he describes how water engulfed his cottage.
About 3 feet of water in the...
Children were forced to run around barefoot. Many families fled with only what they were wearing. Mothers tried to calm their hungry sons and daughters. For some, the distress was too much.
He's okay. He's okay.
A disaster of this magnitude often brings out the best in those who are affected the worst. This single mother who fought the floodwaters to freedom was concerned only with the one she loves.
I wasn't thinking about anything else on the earth. I just, I don't know. But nothing now. Their clothes are all gone.
And here we are this evening at the Salvation Army Hall at Cabramatta. At one time, the Salvation Army people are feeding up to 100 people. Behind me, these people are the ones who 24 hours ago, in darkness, icy cold water in the Landsvale, Cabramatta, Carramar area of the western suburbs, ploughed through water, sometimes waist deep, with children on their back. For a lot of them, they're still in the same clothes they had 24 hours ago. And they also haven't had showers. There's no facilities here at the evacuation headquarters. The Department of Youth and Community Services have shipped and taxied a lot of the younger people, a lot of the smaller children, aged between something like 2 and 5, to motels in the district. But that can't go on. Outside, as you may be able to hear, it's raining. The Georges River is still rising, and it may continue for 5 days. That will put a lot of stress on provisions. With me at the moment is Envoy John Menning. John, you're in charge of the operations here. Is that the biggest problem, providing for those bare necessities?
Yes, things like socks and handkerchiefs and underwear, the things that they took for granted was in the drawer, are not there anymore. They're getting wet and we haven't got an exchange of clothing for them. So small women's clothing, they're up to get.
What about hygiene?
Well, they haven't had a shower for 24 hours and I should imagine that can be pretty overbearing at the best of times.
Keep up the good work. If there's a human side to this complete story at the evacuation headquarters at Cabramatta, is the fact that these people have to now build their own lives all over again. Their possessions have gone.
Metres from running aground. For more than 6 hours, the Golden Falcon and its crew of 23 seemed certain to be dashed onto rocks.
The Golden Falcon came adrift late last night. Her anchors were fouled and her engines could cope with the pounding seas. In howling 50-knot winds, she drifted dangerously towards rocky cliffs. From 16 kilometres off the coast last night, the Golden Falcon was less than 2 kilometres offshore early this morning. At daybreak, it was perilously close to a reef just 200 metres from Marley Beach. This is how close the Golden Falcon came to disaster. With Navy helicopters standing by, rescue teams prepared for the worst. To attach the tow line, one of the tugs took a daring gamble, motoring in just 5 metres away from the wallowing hulk. Tonight, the Golden Falcon is secured safely off the Sydney coast as efforts continue to clear her anchors. Russell Bishop, 7 National News.
And still ahead, the worst is yet to come for many areas. The storm crisis is still threatening lives and property. We'll have the full details soon.
Around Richmond and Windsor to a depth of between 13 and 15 metres. Anticipating that, SES teams today have been evacuating some 1,500 people from low-lying areas. They've been transferred to local community centres. Main roads around these towns remain underwater and will be for some time yet. At Liverpool, floodwaters receded slightly after the Georges River peaked at 9 o'clock this morning. But a combination of tonight's high tide meeting with the day's runoff is expected to bring a new flood peak. About 100 people from that area will spend at least another night away from their flood-bound homes. SES officials say that even when the rain does stop, it'll be at least 12 hours before the floodwaters begin to fall. Some people won't be able to return home before the weekend to begin the heartbreaking job of cleaning up the damage. Charles Wood, 7 National News.
Throughout the trauma of the past 48 hours, officers of the police department, fire brigades, ambulance service and the state emergency service have worked tirelessly to save lives and help those in need. For the SES, the organisation that takes control in emergency situations, it's been a non-stop effort to coordinate all rescue services. It's been their responsibility to handle the evacuation, unable to call on others for help. Last night in Fairfield and suburbs further west, the SES moved to safer surroundings. Also falling to the SES, the task of reaching isolated homes to supply food to reach those finding the rising waters too much to handle, and the daunting task of reaching those in danger before exhaustion and cold see them slip into the floodwaters. At times, their task is thankless. Some people have been abused, SES officers trying to help, but it's in times like this that their contribution can be highlighted. And Don Willisey is tonight at SES headquarters. What's the latest out there now, Don?
Well, as you were saying, it's not only the men and women in the field who are doing all the work. Here at headquarters, people are at their third day now, coordinating information from the outflying post and then feeding it back so that the workmen out there can set their priorities of what has to be done urgently and what can be delayed further down the line. With us we have Ross Brown, Executive Officer of SES. Now, the latest situation is that the emergency has moved further to the northeast with the flooding there.
Yes, the area of concern tonight is more in the North Richmond area. The Georges River itself, which was the main concern last night, has stabilised and will continue at its current level probably until midnight.
Well, what's the problem out at Richmond?
Out at Richmond, we're waiting now for the river to peak. It should peak, on predictions that we have now, it'll peak at about 9 o'clock tonight at North Richmond and about midnight at Windsor. We're expecting a peak of 15 metres is being forecast for North Richmond.
You were saying that some 2,000 people will be evacuated from that area?
Yes, our estimates are that there'll be roughly about 2,000 to 2,200 people evacuated in the North Richmond and Windsor areas.
So there's no let-up for the people here and out in the field as yet?
No, not yet. No, it's still raining. And until the river peaks, they'll be working.
So this looks like definitely going into tomorrow at least.
Oh yes, yes. Well, people won't be, even if the rain stops now, people probably won't be returning to their homes until probably late tomorrow night or even the next day.
OK, Ross, thanks very much. Okay. Obviously, the situation has still got a long way to go before we get back to some sort of normality. And obviously, again, a lot of hard work and a lot of waiting and worrying for a lot of people tonight. Back to you, Ross.
Thank you, Don. Don Willisey there at SES quarters. And the rest of the day's news after, including the reason why our petrol prices are set to rise within weeks.
A stalled car, a surge of water swept a 3-year-old and 11-month-old baby from their parents' arms. Another incident saw milkman mates Alan Cooper and Gregory Black electrocuted by down power lines.
Canley Vale literally lost their backyards to the flood. In among the sodden debris at this Fairfield home, a forgotten pamphlet put a bitter tinge on brave attempts at humour.
Today's the day of the victims, the full reality of the situation. Job to push aside despair and to begin picking up the pieces of their lives.
And when you're told, as most of these residents have been, that you're not insured for flood damage, just coping requires an effort.
Well, we have to cope. We've got no bloody choice. We've got plenty of friends around help. You know, that's the best we can do. We just have to start again.
The state government has promised to go into bat for the victims against the insurance company hard luck. In the meantime, they have to rely on the help of friends and old faithfuls in times of crisis, like the Salvation Army, for material and much-needed morals.
I think the realisation of what's happened is just beginning to come out.
About 50 homes in the week, several on low outlying areas. Most houses in the Windsor township, however, escaped the floodwaters. One exception was this riverfront sandstone home. This afternoon, its downstairs kitchen and lounge room was still under 2 metres of water. And while only a few days ago, the rain had been welcomed by local vegetable growers, today it was being declared a major catastrophe. Hundreds of hectares of potato crops, cauliflowers, lettuce and trees laden with oranges have been destroyed in the flood. Farmers estimate their losses in the millions of dollars. At $400 a tonne for seed and $300 a tonne for fertiliser, potatoes are the most expensive crop to grow. Under this expanse of water lies some 40 hectares of newly sown potatoes. The loss to the farmer, hundreds of thousands of dollars. How much do you think you've lost?
6 months' work. Hard work. Most of us, we go to the markets at, 1 o'clock every morning. We come home, load up and pick our vegetables. Who can estimate what it is lost?
Although potatoes had only just been planted, the flood came at a time when most growers were in the middle of their harvests. Now, it's before work can begin on summer crops. For consumers, the disaster will mean inevitable shortages and price increases. Brad Schmidt, National 9 News.
Today, the coastline took a battering from some of the biggest seas.
The first signs of trouble came shortly after 7 this morning when a gale-force southeaster, ideal for sailboarding, created problems for boating. The Bundina ferry on its trip across Port Hacking from Gunnamatta Bay was blown onto rocks. Only a 2-man crew was on board and the pair managed to turn the 100-seat craft around and limped safely back to base. It's now on a slipway for repairs. Further north on Sydney Harbour, huge swells of up to 7 metres charged through the heads, creating all kinds of problems for commuter services. The hydrofoils were cancelled, and only those who didn't care braved the 7-mile journey to Manly on conventional ferries. By now, the Weather Bureau had renewed a gale warning for the coast, and 70-kilometre-an-hour winds whipped up a surf of Hawaiian class. This is Whale Beach taking a pounding, and that piece of jagged cliff face is 30 metres above water level. Unlike Hawaii, there were no surfers here in Sydney, although this group tried to master the waves at Narrabeen without success. At Manly, it was definitely a case of surfing being a spectator sport with no participants. Elizabeth Hayes, National 9 News.